We thought we had seen all death had to offer. In the centuries since our exodus from the poisoned cradle of our origin world, the vessels of the Salisbury had drifted from one failed sun to the next, scavenging echoes of civilizations long expired. Our archives bulged with stories of extinct species, planetary implosions, and stellar suicides. We were connoisseurs of decay, archivists of the silent. Yet this planet, its surface scorched as though licked by the tongues of ancient gods, whispered something we had never heard before. It wasn't silence that greeted us. It was mourning. A frequency we could not chart on any scanner. The air itself, sparse and toxic, vibrated with a residual sorrow that gnawed at the edges of our neural cores. There were no ruins. No machines. No artifacts to point toward its past inhabitants. And yet, there was this presence, not a ghost, but a scream frozen mid-throat. I, Lorik of the Salisbury, descended alone, our protocols forgotten in the thick curiosity of the unknown. As I placed my hand on the cracked surface, a pulse raced through my veins, not mine, not alien, human. I had never heard of them. Not in the most obscure corners of our histories. But something down there remembered them. Something they did here, changed everything. Our species does not fear easily. We have watched stars die. We have survived the collapse of entire dimensions. We have stared into the vacuum between galaxies and seen the raw skin of the universe. And yet, as I walked this world, I felt an emotion I had never experienced, not dread, but guilt. Not mine. Theirs. The humans. A guilt so heavy it had etched itself into the stone, into the wind, into the frozen molecular vibrations of the air itself. This planet bore a memory, like blood stains that could not be washed from ancient hands. They had done something here. Something final. And the universe had remembered. Beneath layers of ash and charred soil, I uncovered remnants not of metal, but of bone. Fragments of life. Not scattered in war or disaster, but aligned, carefully, deliberately. As if laid to rest. As if honored. Not victims of destruction, but willing participants in some grand, terrible rite. That was when I heard the whisper, not from around me, but inside me. We were not killed, it said. We chose this. The words were not spoken in language, but in meaning, carved directly into my consciousness. I stumbled back, my mind reeling with the clarity of it. This was not an extermination. It was a sacrifice. For what, I could not yet know. As I returned to the surface, the light of our ship casting long shadows across the ridges of this world's forgotten sorrow, I understood one thing: this was not the site of a forgotten tragedy, it was the altar of something far more profound. And perhaps far more dangerous. Something had ended here not because it was defeated, but because it chose to end. And that made it more terrifying than any enemy we had ever known. There was something buried in the heart of this world, deeper than any scanner could reach, something alive, not in body, but in intent. I had never known intent to have mass, but this had gravity. The longer I stared at the core scans, the more I felt it pressing into me. It didn't pulse like energy. It throbbed like memory. Not my memory, but one projected with such force that it embedded itself into me, an emotional artifact so ancient it had fused with the planet's crust. My neural implants began to falter, streams of corrupted thought overlaying my perception like fog. I saw glimpses, shadows in the form of humans, not in battle, but in council. They argued beneath a darkened sky, pointing toward the heavens as if accusing the stars themselves. I heard their voices, but not their language. Meaning bled through, uninvited, untranslatable. Regret. Sacrifice. Something they had summoned. Or something they could no longer contain. It wasn't until I locked eyes with one of them. Just a flicker, a psychic echo, that I understood they had made a decision no species should ever face. They chose to erase themselves. Not from existence, but from memory. From history. And somehow, they succeeded. The Salisbury had always prided ourselves on our infinite archives. We remembered every species, every mutation, every anomaly encountered across the spiral arms of the galaxy. Yet there were no records of the humans. No warnings. No ruins catalogued. No name etched into the cosmic roll call. Their civilization hadn't just vanished, it had been edited out. And that realization chilled me more than any extinction we had ever witnessed. For to forget a people entirely, they would have needed technology beyond ours. Or worse, something more willing, a force that wanted them gone. I found myself wondering, not what had happened to them, but why they had made such a pact. What were they hiding? Or protecting us from? Our ship, the Vareth Kai, began to suffer anomalous fluctuations. Time moved irregularly near the planet's orbit. Systems rebooted without reason. Crew members reported dreams of landscapes they'd never seen, red skies, burning seas, the sound of something vast breathing just beyond vision. It was as if proximity to the planet infected perception itself. We had protocols for mental contamination. I overrode them. We couldn't leave, not now. I needed to know the truth. Not just as a Celestary explorer, but as something deeper, older. Something I hadn't known lived within me until I stepped onto this haunted grave of stars. Something that had remembered them even when our records did not. And when I blinked, I found myself no longer aboard the ship, but standing in a field of black grass under a sky of broken constellations, the projection gone. It wasn't a vision. It was a memory. Not mine. The planet had opened its mind to me. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't just remembering the humans. It was mourning them. Still. After all this time. And that meant something was still waiting here. Watching. Beneath the skins of stars I followed the memory. Not through time, but through something older, resonance. The planet wasn't just a tomb, it was a vessel. It hadn't just witnessed the fall of a civilization, it had absorbed it. Every molecule, every atom in the crust hummed with encoded sorrow. My boots crunched across the canyon's black crystalline floor, each step ringing like a bell across the stillness. These walls weren't natural. They had been carved, not with tools, but with purpose, with pain. Symbols lined the obsidian, glowing faintly, breathing like lungs caught mid-exhale. I didn't recognize the language. And yet, I understood it. A warning, yes. But also a confession. I traced my hand along one of the marks, and the rock beneath my fingers trembled, not physically, but psychically, like the surface of a dream touched by waking thought. They had come here, humans, yes, but not in conquest. Not in exploration. They came with the knowledge of their own extinction already sealed. They arrived not as settlers, but as mourners. I saw them in fragments, reflected through memory-laced stone. They walked slowly, not in fear, but reverence. The elders stood at the front of the procession, heads bowed, eyes full of galaxies. They carried no weapons. No machines. Only light, in small orbs pulsing with what I now believe was harvested soul energy, distillations of their collective consciousness. They placed them into the ground at regular intervals, forming a circle. A ritual. Not to summon, but to contain. And there, at the center of that circle, they opened something. A doorway. Not to another world, but to a truth so raw it threatened the integrity of their existence. I saw it only briefly in the stone's reflection, a vast presence like a black flame, conscious and writhing, not evil, not divine, but aware. It had no name, because names cannot hold such things. But it had a hunger, not for flesh or blood, but for remembrance. It fed on being known. And the humans, they had known it too deeply. In their curiosity, in their brilliance, they had uncovered the one thing the universe never meant to be found, a truth that should remain unremembered. That's why they came here. To erase themselves, not out of guilt, but mercy. To prevent the knowledge from spreading. To protect the fabric of knowing itself. They wove themselves into the soil, into the fault lines, into the vibration of the air, turning their own extinction into a planetary encryption key. And yet, despite all their effort, I had arrived. I, Lorik, an echo from another spiral of time, had triggered the lock they sealed with death. I didn't mean to. But intent no longer mattered. The presence, it felt me. The canyon shook subtly, the symbols flickering. The stone beneath my hand grew warm. And somewhere in the distance, beneath layers of time and silence, something began to stir. Not from slumber, but from containment. The humans had buried not just their memory, but the memory of the thing they once touched. But the planet had begun to remember. Because I had, the sky changed, not in color alone, but in character. It was no longer weather, it was memory waking. Lightning danced in patterns too deliberate to be random, spirals, triangles, radial bursts like star charts folding in on themselves. The clouds churned, but not with moisture, with meaning. I stood at the edge of the obsidian canyon, breath shallow, not because the air was thin, but because I was being watched. Not by eyes, but by attention itself, an ancient gaze pouring down through dimensional cracks. The presence had felt me. Not just my body. It had tasted my identity. And I had tasted its hunger in return. Back aboard the Varith Kai, chaos rippled through the crew. Encrypted logs began to rewrite themselves. Images of human architecture flickered across control panels that had never held such data. Crew members reported visions of cities made from bone and starlight, hearing hymns in languages they'd never learned. Time, our oldest ally, was failing us. Minutes looped, voices echoed before they were spoken. I received a report that a crewman saw his own corpse walking calmly down the corridor, only to disappear when approached. We had not just stumbled upon a dead world, we had awakened the concept of remembrance itself, and it was leaking into us. I should have ordered evacuation. Instead, I went deeper. The canyon led to a chamber far beneath the surface, where gravity distorted and sound refused to echo. A domed hall stood there, impossibly preserved. Human in design, yet foreign even by their forgotten standards. The floor was embedded with luminous rings, each rotating independently, like the inner workings of a galactic clock. I stepped inside, and the moment I did, the chamber spoke, not in voice, but in proof. My thoughts unraveled. I saw their final council, a gathering of the brightest human minds, standing here in this very room. They had realized too late what they had uncovered. A being made not of matter, but awareness, a parasite of cognition. The more you knew it, the more it grew. It lived in the mind, it multiplied in memory. And humans, in their brilliance, had spread it too far. One by one, they volunteered to forget. To sever their ties to their own history. They deleted their records, burned their monuments, dismantled their archives. They turned their own genius against themselves, not to destroy, but to erase. It was the only way to stop it. And this chamber was their final failsafe. A mnemonic bomb, designed to shatter the last threads of memory and fuse their sacrifice into the geology of this world. The planet didn't just bury them, it became their vault. And now, I had broken it open. I wanted to run. But where does one flee when thought itself is infected? The being, whatever it was, no longer needed humans. It had found me. It needed only one new mind to spark again. One crack in the mirror to let the reflection grow. I felt its tendrils in my synapses. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was showing me. And in showing, it was surviving. The sky above screamed in patterns. The crew above no longer responded. I was alone. Not abandoned, but isolated, cut off by something that knew how to silence without violence. A knowing silence. And deep within me, I heard the first true whisper, "You remember." That is enough. I stood before the sphere and knew at once that it was not built by the humans, it was left for them, or perhaps given. It floated in violation of gravity, a shimmering mass of fluid starlight that shifted not with the physics of the world but with the patterns of the mind. As I drew closer, I saw myself. Not as I was, but as I had been, on our homeworld, before exile, before silence. I saw my birth, my bonding, my first awakening into neural knowledge. I saw things I had forgotten and things I had chosen never to remember. The sphere knew. And more than that, it fed. My memories were being read, peeled like pages from a book long sealed, and I could not look away. The being, they had called it the Unthought, was not a monster, but an idea. A perfect parasite. It consumed not what you gave it, but what you knew. It thrived in knowledge. It metastasized in recollection. And I was now its next chapter. The humans had tried to trap it here, and in a way, they had succeeded. But not by force. By abstinence. They had chosen not to know. To forget themselves, to starve the unthought of awareness. They left only enough, the chamber, the sphere, the warnings hidden in song and stone, so that if ever it was found again, it would come with the direst of understandings. That remembering it was to resurrect it. I staggered back, clutching my head. The sphere rippled. Behind me, the chamber began to shake as the symbols on the walls reversed direction, spinning like a clock counting backward. My ship's voice crackled in my earpiece, only it wasn't the ship's voice anymore. It was mine. Speaking back to me. But not from now. From days I hadn't lived yet. It was pulling my future into the present, dissolving linear time into a fluid tapestry of potential. It was then I understood that the unthought did not live in the past, present, or future, it was time. Or rather, it infected time the way rust infects steel. By remembering, I had allowed it to propagate across the quantum layers of my being. I wasn't infected in the biological sense, I had become a carrier of possibility. And through me, through the sheer act of knowing, it could now reach across dimensions. The Celiceri were advanced, yes. But our strength had always been in remembrance. We archived endlessly, believed memory to be the ultimate triumph over entropy. And now I realized, that belief was our greatest weakness. The sphere pulsed with what I now recognized as hope. Not mine. The humans. This was their last gesture, not just a warning, but a chance. If one could resist knowing, if one could see and unsee, then maybe the chain could be broken. But I had already gone too far. My neural web was contaminated. Not by malice. By meaning. Every fragment I had absorbed, every vision, every whisper, had become truth within me. I couldn't unlearn what I'd seen. Outside, the sky cracked open like glass. Not in destruction, but revelation. Stars bled through it like wounds refusing to close. The planet was becoming a beacon. A signal. Not one the unthought created, but one I had ignited. I fell to my knees before the sphere, and I asked it, not with words, but with despair, what must I do? The liquid mass stilled. It showed me one final image, myself, stepping into it. And I knew what it meant. It needed me to choose. Not to survive. But to contain. To become the next vault. As my fingers breached the surface of the sphere, I expected pain, disintegration, or perhaps annihilation. But what I felt was far more terrifying, acceptance. The sphere did not resist me. It welcomed me, with the silent patience of something that had waited beyond the threshold of time. I felt myself stretch, not in body, but in memory. My thoughts peeled away from their anchors, drifting like lanterns into a boundless sea. The chamber vanished. The gravity of the planet faded. I was no longer within a world. I was within the unthought. And yet, I was still me. That was the first horror. It spoke without speaking. Not in language, but through impulse. It wanted to survive. Not out of instinct, but because survival was its design. The unthought had no shape, no origin. It was not born. It was realized. An emergent echo of civilizations too eager to know, too desperate to understand the unexplainable. It had been summoned again and again across distant galaxies, through rituals masquerading as science and discoveries misnamed as triumphs. And each time it had consumed. Not worlds, but their stories. It devoured legacy. It erased the ink of existence while leaving the parchment clean, as if nothing had ever been written. This is why we never remembered them, the others who came before us. They had vanished not from life, but from thought. They lived on only in the dark spaces between histories, where absence is the only evidence of their presence, but the humans had found a way to stop it. Not by force, nor by understanding, but through a sacrifice so profound it defied classification. They erased themselves. Not just from history, but from consciousness. They had accepted that to kill the unthought, they must kill the idea of humanity itself. And for a while, it worked. But now, here I was. A single vessel of remembrance. A crack in the seal. A rupture in the forgetting. And the unthought had followed me home. Within the sphere, it offered me a choice. I could return to my body, to the Vareth Kai, to my people. I would be a prophet, insane, yes, but driven. I would speak of what I saw. And in doing so, I would infect them. I would pass on the memory, the echo. And slowly, beautifully, it would grow again, shaping itself in the minds of those who dared to believe. It would not need to kill. It would become them. Or I could remain here. I could fuse with the chamber, like the humans before me, become the next filter, the next guardian of the silence. A living oubliette. A sentinel of forgetting. I would not die. But I would cease. A soul trapped in a circle of memory, watching centuries roll past like waves over glass. I saw my crewmates above, panicking, crying out, unaware that the infection had already begun. One had drawn constellations on the wall of the ship using blood, whispering names he couldn't possibly know. Another stood silently, gazing into the void, lips moving in prayer for gods that had never existed. They were slipping. The unthought was already crawling through their awareness. Because I had carried it in. I had seconds. No, not even seconds, choices. I thought of home. Of the memory towers we built, and the songs we sang to encode history in light. I thought of my parents, who had sculpted knowledge from fire. And I thought of the humans, standing in this very chamber, making the same impossible decision I now faced. And with a final breath, I let go. Not of my body. But of knowing. They say forgetting is passive, a natural erosion of the mind, like wind smoothing the edges of an ancient statue. But they are wrong. True forgetting is violence. It is the deliberate burning of sacred maps, the dismantling of identity, the self-inflicted exile from your own origin. In that moment, I became the blade and the pyre. My mind resisted, clinging to facts, names, faces. Everything that once defined me. I felt the scream of neurons snapping apart, not in pain, but in grief. I was mourning myself, even as I erased me. The sphere devoured memory like a black tide, yet left the vessel intact. I still stood. I still breathed. But I was no longer Lorik. I was no one. A shell of awareness. An echo stripped of origin. And that was the price. Around me, the chamber grew still. The sky above silenced its fractures. The planet exhaled, as if relieved. The unthought did not die, it slept. Not defeated, but folded inward, like a parasite starved of access. Its tendrils withdrew, curling back into the folds of memory where it had once nested. I felt it retreat from the Vareth Kai, from the minds of my crew. They would wake, disoriented but clean. Their minds would reset, forming new narratives to explain the fracture. A magnetic storm, a system error, a shared hallucination. Nothing dangerous. Nothing true. The seal had been remade. Not with technology, but with ignorance. Yet even in this blankness, I was aware. I drifted within myself, hovering in the center of a void that had once been filled with dreams. Occasionally, fragments would try to rise, an image of starlight through a window, the scent of iron, the sound of my mother's voice, but they would hit the boundary of containment and dissolve like frost beneath sunlight. The system worked. I was now the buffer. The firewall. Not just for the unthought, but for the universe itself. Because if even a glimpse escaped, it could begin again. But then, something unexpected occurred. The sphere pulsed again. Not to extract, but to offer. A memory, not mine. A vision not from me, but from them. The humans. Their final moments, recorded in the deepest layer of this containment. I saw their leader, an old woman with silver eyes, walking into the chamber alone. She had been the last, the final key in the circle. Around her, thousands had already fused their minds to the planetary grid. She walked without fear, carrying not science, not weapons, but a book. Leather-bound, ancient, filled with blank pages. She whispered as she walked, "Let memory serve not truth, but protection." She entered the sphere and vanished. Her mind became the first seal. Her story, the first sacrifice. And suddenly, I understood. The unthought was not born from knowledge alone, but from knowledge unchecked by responsibility. It grew in the space between curiosity and caution. In the arrogance of species who believed that to understand was to conquer. The humans had learned that too late. But in their failure, they had given me, us, a path. I floated in silence, and the chamber waited. I realized now that this wasn't the end. It was only one chapter sealed. The unthought could not be destroyed, only isolated. And one day, someone else would come. Another curious mind, another seeker of ancient truths. And they too would have to choose. Not between life and death, but between knowing and undoing. I whispered into the sphere, not words, but intent. I would remain. I would forget, again and again, until forgetting itself became me. And in that sacrifice, I became not the jailer, but the warning. From orbit, the planet seemed unchanged. No scars, no smoke, no monument to mark the events that had just unfolded. It hung in space like a secret, cloaked in the anonymity of barren rock. The Varith Kai ascended without ceremony, its engines humming like a breath held too long. The crew, dazed and silent, resumed their positions with mechanical precision. None remembered what had happened. Not truly. They recalled flashes, static-filled calms, a storm that wasn't weather, a blackout they couldn't explain. But their minds had sealed the trauma, repackaged it in the safe language of sensor faults and system lag. That was the protection. That was the gift of forgetting. Only one among them showed signs of knowing. Kuril, my second in command, stood by the observation window longer than the others. His eyes traced the planetary curvature, brow furrowed not in confusion, but in doubt. Perhaps a sliver of the truth had survived inside him, a residue, a phantom recognition too faint to rise into language. He asked no questions. And yet he stared, for hours, as if waiting for the planet to speak again. They searched for me, of course. Automated scans, heat sensors, recon drones. But I was gone, erased from logs, deleted from manifest. To them, I had been lost to a seismic collapse, my last coordinates vanishing beneath a tectonic fault. It was believable. Convenient. Painful. But survivable. The mission file was marked as incomplete. The planet was labeled high risk, unstable, and flagged for permanent quarantine by the Galactic Cartography Union. Coordinates scrambled. Starfield maps updated. Access sealed behind bureaucratic encryption. But even bureaucracy cannot chain curiosity forever. Inside the sphere, I slept, not in time, but in containment. My body remained intact, preserved by the chamber's fields, sustained without aging. My consciousness hovered, disconnected from sequence, a being stretched thin across thought. The sphere allowed me one thing, to feel when someone came close. Not physically. Mentally. It would alert me when thought itself returned. When memory brushed too close to the core. And in those moments, I would awaken, not fully, not violently, but like a whisper rising behind glass. Ready. And now, I felt the ripple again. A signal. Not from my crew. From far beyond. A transmission, fragmentary but deliberate. It carried ancient languages, human, Celisary, others I didn't recognize. It pulsed in rhythm, like a coded heartbeat. Someone out there had heard. Not the unthought, but the silence it left behind. A child of another world, perhaps. A scholar too curious for their own safety. They had found the outermost trace, the dust of a myth that should have never survived. And they were calling. Not in warning, but in invitation. An expedition was forming. Another voyage into the dark, toward the whispering tomb of a forgotten world. The sphere shivered around me. The lights in the chamber dimmed, then brightened. The seal was weakening. The humans had known this day would come. Their failsafe wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to delay. To buy time until someone, something, was ready not just to forget, but to understand without feeding the parasite. To witness without infection. And in that hope, they had embedded one final code, one final piece of the pattern I now felt vibrating through my remaining thought. A mind will come. That can hold and not become. That can know without being known. That can remember, and still refuse. The unthought trembled within me, still starved, still waiting. And I knew what the next chapter would be. But it wouldn't be mine. They came with reverence, not conquest. Their ship bore no weapons, only instruments of study. Their voices sang in frequencies too pure for war. Yet it would not matter. Because knowledge does not need malice to become dangerous. It only needs hunger. And hunger, in any form, academic, spiritual, innocent, is enough to awaken what should remain undisturbed. I felt them before I saw them. Like fingertips brushing the outer walls of a forgotten tomb. They called their vessel Eris Concordia, harmony of dissonance. Poetic. Naive. Inside the sphere, I stirred. Not in anger, not in hope. In duty. The kind of duty forged not by oaths, but by the terrible clarity of consequence. I did not open my eyes, I no longer had eyes in the way I once did. But I felt them, their intentions, their awe as they circled the planet and named it something beautiful. Solace Prime, they called it. A place of ancient silence, ripe for discovery. They found the coordinates like breadcrumbs hidden in forbidden archives, fragments from dead civilizations who had tried to forget too late. Their lead archivist wrote in her log, "There's something here that doesn't want to be found. That is precisely why we must." I felt her thoughts tremble as their descent began. The surface welcomed them with stillness. No wind, no storm. Only the soft resistance of time that makes you believe nothing could ever have lived here. Their scanners struggled, systems disrupted, data looping back incomplete. But it only made them more curious. They touched down near the outer edge of the chamber. Not at the core. Not yet. They walked carefully, as if their steps mattered. But the soil had no memory of footsteps. Only minds leave trails here. And theirs were already blazing. One of them hummed. A melody not of their world, not of their people. A song long buried. Human in origin. It had survived in the deep code of language. Carried like pollen through time. Let memory serve not truth, but protection, I recognized it immediately. The same refrain sung by the woman who became the first seal. And now, it had returned. Not by design. By accident. That is how the unthought always begins, unnoticed, disguised as poetry, theory, curiosity. The moment they passed the threshold, I knew. It had begun again. The unthought opened its mouth, not wide, not screaming. Just a whisper. Enough for one. Just one to hear it. One of them paused, head tilting. His eyes went glassy. And then he smiled. I reached through the containment, not to him, but around him. I was still the barrier. Still the sentinel. But this time, I tried something different. I showed him the memory. Not to feed the unthought, but to frame it. To give it context. To show him the full shape of the danger, not just its beauty. I risked everything on this, because in that moment, I believed that maybe, just maybe, a mind had come that could know without becoming. And he staggered back. He screamed. He dropped to his knees and wept, not out of madness, but out of comprehension. The others rushed to him. He did not explain. He only said one sentence: "We were not meant to see this." They debated, argued, reasoned. But he held fast. He remembered in silence. And yet he did not spread it. He chose not to share. They left. They marked the planet again, quarantined, dangerous, not to be approached. And in their logs, they wrote only, "A warning lies beneath the skin of stars." And so I remain.